Tridge. I'll give you a brief introduction. Tridge is a data and intelligence platform, and some of the intelligence that we provide includes price data, weather data, trade data. We do custom reports to help clients enhance their decision-making skills. And we also provide solutions to help suppliers and buyers to find global business opportunities and connect. So one of the ways that we do this is through Tridge Exhibition 365. So Tridge Exhibition 365 is a virtual showroom where verified suppliers and buyers can come together. And that also includes our sponsor for today's webinar, which is Alfoa. So check out Exhibition 365 to meet some for some opportunities to meet some of the verified buyers and sellers globally. Now, in today's webinar, if you would need proof of attendance, we will be providing an attendance certificate. In order to get this attendance certificate near the end of the webinar, we'll be sharing a link in the chat to a survey. So please take this survey, and at the end of the survey, if you enter your details, you'll be able to receive this attendance certificate. Even if you don't require a proof of attendance, please also take the survey. It just helps us to provide quality content in our webinars and also going forward. Now, moving on, today's webinar is going to consist of 3 or maybe 4 parts. Let me just explain how it's going to work. So the first 2 parts is going to be a presentation, which is going to be covering the emerging trends in the meat and seafood production and consumption market. And then also it's going to take a look at the short and medium-term production outlook for meat and seafood. That will be followed by a panel discussion where our experts will answer some of the burning questions in the meat and seafood markets, specifically for their regions. And then if there is still some time left at the end of the webinar, we'll be going into a Q&A session, which will be taking questions live from our audience in this webinar. So that's if time permits, so if we still have time at the end of the webinar. To just tell you who's going to be participating in our webinar today. So it's going to be myself. My name is Theo, and I'm a global market analyst in Tridge's market intelligence analytics team. And I'll be your host today. And then the heavy lifters are Rene, Guilherme, and Jaison. Now, Rene is going to be our presenter. Guilherme and Jaison, they're our experts today, which means the presentation is going to be done by Rene. So I'm going to ask him to introduce himself. And then when we get to the panel discussion, I'm going to ask Guilherme and Jaison to introduce themselves. So with that part being done, I think I'm going to go straight over to you, Rene. Rene, can you give us a brief introduction of yourself and then just take it from there? Let me just, I think you're on mute. Let me just unmute you, Rene.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, let's go.
Perfect. Thank you, Theo. Hello, everyone. My name is Rene Salinas, and I'm a global market analyst based in Mexico. I cover meat and seafood here at Tridge, and I'm very happy to be here. So today we'll be talking about the main trends of some of the major products within this sector. I'm going to start with beef. If you can go ahead to the next slide, please. Perfect. Okay. So in the case of beef, prices reached record or near record highs last year on the back of strong demand. There was very strong demand after the economies started reopening after the pandemic. Okay, so there was this major impulse to buy. This led to price hikes in the first part of the year. Nonetheless, then inflation came. So when inflation came, and then interest rates were raised to combat inflation, actually, they made actually credit more expensive. Money was more expensive. So consumption started to decline, and which led in the second half of the year to a sharp decline in prices. Okay. Sorry. So prices seem to have experienced a small rebound this year. This is new. So let's see what happened in some of the major market players. I'm going to start with Brazil. Can you go ahead, Theo, to the next slide? Perfect. Okay. So Brazil is the main beef exporter in the world and beat all records in exports in 2022. It actually suspended its exports earlier this year in February to China and other major destinations due to the finding of an atypical case of mad cow disease. But it was nothing major. The suspension was reverted for China in a month. It lasted a little bit more in other destinations, but in any case, exports actually dropped below to 2022 levels in February through April. Okay, but in May and then in June, exports continue to beat records again, and China is leading the demand. Okay, it's also worth noting that prices remain considerably below last year's levels. You can see that in the graph below. This has been caused by a mix of ongoing increases in production. Brazil is increasing its production. It's actually expected to increase production this year by 3%, and also ongoing declines in production costs. Okay, production costs globally in general are declining. Okay, domestic demand has also been slow. Why do you think that is? Because prices are still a little bit higher than the 5-year average. So prices are below last year. That's important, but they also are higher than the 5-year average. That means consumption is still a little bit lower than expected. Beef prices in general are sensitive to price hikes, to price movements, because there's alternative protein products. Of course, you can find cheaper poultry, you can find cheaper pork. So that's what's hitting domestic consumption in Brazil. However, as we can see in exports numbers, demand from abroad is pretty good as well. Okay. So now let's pass into the US. Okay, US beef production is declining now. The beef production rose sharply in 2022, which was on the back of higher cattle slaughter, but this started to decline in Q4 of last year and more sharply in Q1 of this year. Okay, this is expected to intensify in the upcoming periods and in 2024 especially. So what's happening in the US? So there were dry conditions, especially last year, which led to more cattle culling. And in the short term, this brought production up, but eventually this started to reduce the cattle numbers. And that's why we're seeing lower production now. This is very similar to what happened in Australia a couple of years back, which is Australia is now in the recovery phase. Actually, production is pretty high. It's climbing pretty sharply in Australia right now. So this will be the case in the US, but in next years, right now, US production is actually declining. Okay. Um, South Korea is the US main destination for beef. Okay, South Korea is the main market, followed by Japan. But both of these countries are actually seeing a contraction in its import levels. That's not because of low demand in South Korea or in Japan, but because there is lower production. Okay, there is only one major country that is importing more beef from the US, and that is the case of Mexico. But that's a special case that I'm going to review in the next slide. Okay, so what's happening in Mexico? Okay, Mexico is actually importing more beef from the US, but despite there's a lower production, of course, but that's because there's a weaker US dollar against the peso. The Mexican peso is at its strongest level since 2016. So that's very pretty strong peso, and you can see that imports from so it's when the peso is stronger, that makes it easier for Mexicans or cheaper for Mexicans to buy products priced in dollars. So the case of US beef, for example, and exports to Mexico, US beef exports to Mexico have actually grown 10% year over year so far in 2023, while the peso has actually strengthened by about that much over the same period. Now, if you look into the graph, you can see that there's a lot of potential there. You can see beef exports have actually grown a little bit less than the pesos strengthening, but that's because of the limited production in the US. If there was normal production and that strong peso, you would see an even higher increase in US exports to Mexico. Perfect. Okay, so I'm going to pass on to shrimp. So this market, it's a little bit different than the one of beef. I'm going to cover general tendencies of all of these markets in the last section, but for now, shrimp. This market has been subdued globally, with the exception of China. China is the bright spot. Chinese imports of frozen beef actually are booming right now. They are actually taking advantage of low prices. Prices are the lowest in the U.S., for example. They're the lowest since 2012. I think we're going to review that in the next slide. Let's go into review each case, please. Okay, so China. From January to May 2023, China imported 415,000 tons of frozen shrimp. That's a very substantial increase of 48% year over year. Okay, they're coming from a high base and they're actually growing by double-digit numbers, almost close to 50%. That's quite a lot. Okay, who is the major exporter to China? Ecuador. Ecuador is the main import origin with them, and it actually was the main gainer this year, so far this year, which imports are actually experiencing a remarkable 57%. Okay, this means they are exporting. They represent 73% of the Chinese total import market. That's a lot. We're going to see a lot about Ecuador and India. I'm going to review that why are they growing so fast. Other winners in the shrimp market in China include India, Argentina, and Indonesia. On the other hand, in the case of China, Vietnam and Iran are witnessing important losses but mostly due to the growth of the other countries that I just mentioned. Okay, the import price is actually lower, and this is consistent with what has going on throughout the year. Next slide, please. Okay, I'm going to make a brief parenthesis here because China and Ecuador just finalized an FTA in May, and this will induce a tariff on Ecuadorian shrimp exports to China to eventually reduce to 0% over the next 10 years. Okay, this will of course strengthen Ecuador's position as the main export to China. These numbers, the graph above shows the numbers of 2022. They represented 65% of total exports to China, and this number has grown to 72% in January, May of 2023. Okay, some of the main advantage of Ecuador, why am I speaking a lot of Ecuador, is because they have a lower export price along with India. Okay, this has made Ecuadorian volume to grow a lot in China and other countries, as we are going to see in the next slides. So that's the main reason why. As you can see, Ecuador's share in the Chinese markets has grown over the past months, and with this FTA, this is going to help. Maybe not a lot, but it's going to increase its competitive advantage to export. Okay. Now let's pass into the US. Okay, so the US market remains a little bit subdued compared to the previous 2 years. What's going on in the US? Prices and demand soared in 2022 as a case of beef. Okay, there was this big expectations of the economy reopening. So the people started to import a lot. There was this high expectations of demand. But then inflation came, of course. Well, just see first in January, May 2021 and January, May 2022, with the starting of the reopening of the economy, we're going to see this. We see this sharp increase in imports. Okay, and then in the second half of the year, we see this we see these sharp declines. Okay. Prices, you can also see they reach almost record highs by April 2022. You can see that in the graph above. Okay, and then inflation came, as in the case of beef. So why did inflation came? There were these global supply chain disruptions with all these expectations of demand and limited supply because of the pandemic. the start of the Russia-Ukraine conflict. And to make matters worse for some consumers, government started to raise interest rates to combat that inflation. But that, of course, that actually combats inflation, but that makes money more expensive. So consumption actually declines. So after April, prices started to decline, and the market was in oversupply. Okay, the expectations of higher demand with this shock of inflation created an oversupply in the market that still is going on. You can see that prices have declined from April to December of last year and to February of this year. But there has been a small rebound. Okay, there's the most recent numbers in May. For example, May's volume year-over-year decline was the second lowest in 11 months. Okay, so the downside seems to be narrowing. Second, this is evident in the graph below. The volume imported was below 2022's, but it actually grew compared to a previous 5-year average. Okay, you can see January May demand in the US was lower than the previous 2 years, but it actually is better than 2020, 2019, and 2018. Okay, so that's good. Demand is not that low as prices would suggest, of course. Third, the year-over-year decline in price, as you can see in the graph above, was the lowest in 6 months, and actually prices managed to reach their highest level in 5 months. Despite the seasonality, as you can see in 2022 and the 5-year average, prices tend to decline in May, and they're actually rising right now. So that's a silver lining for the U.S. market. It's too early to suggest that the market is going to recover sharply or something, but these are some indications that the market could be on its path to recovery. Okay, can we move on to the next slide, please? Okay, I'm going to touch USA's main import origins. As you can see in the graph above, we have these examples. There's India, Ecuador, Indonesia, and Vietnam. Vietnam has consistently the highest price, and you can see Ecuador with the lowest price. Okay, that's the main reason that Ecuador's exports have grown that much, because they have this competitive advantage to other countries. Okay, in the second graph, you can see as this price difference. I just took examples here, Vietnam and Ecuador, as the difference in export price or in import price from these origins between Vietnam and Ecuador has grown over the years. That gap between exports from Ecuador and Vietnam has also grown. Okay, so when this price differential increases, you can see that the Ecuador exports more volume relative to Vietnam over the years. Okay, that's what this second graph is saying. That's it. Can you move on, please, Theo? Perfect. So another major market, what's going on with Japan? It's a little bit different than what's happening in the US. For example, Japan imported 47,000 tons of frozen shrimp so far into this year. This represents a decline compared to last year and to 2021. But also excluding 2020, which was a normal year, of course, imports so far are slightly below 2018 and 2019 numbers. Okay, so this is different from the US, which actually has better numbers than 2019, 2018, but Japan doesn't. Okay, so we have talked about how the global price of shrimp has been declining globally. However, this isn't really the case with Japan. When you put into the equation exchange rates, I'll leave it at that. You can see as in the graph above, when you put that in Japanese yen terms, the price hasn't actually declined that much in Japan. Prices as of May were lower than the 2022's numbers, but they're still way above the 5-year average. Okay, so this price gap between what's normal, what has been normal in the past years, adding that in the context of generalized inflation, Japan is also battling with inflation, as many countries are still doing. That makes Japanese consumers to go into cheaper protein. Okay, and that reflects on a lower demand for shrimp in this case. So that's the reason higher prices in terms of Japanese yen terms are making demand actually a little bit lower than what's historically the numbers. Okay, finally, let's talk about salmon. Now, salmon prices in Norway reached a multi-decade high this past March, as demand has been relatively strong to prices, and there was this limited production in the first months of the year. But adding to this bullishness was this ongoing uncertainty about this new salmon tax of the Norwegian government was going to enact. Well, it actually enacted, but was finally voted on in May, and that is some of the uncertainty regarding that. So, in our view, this has been the major price driver. Okay, this uncertainty over the tax has actually dissipated when the tax was actually finalized in May. That made the price to actually decline because the uncertainty got definitely lower. Okay, let's move on to the next slide, please. Okay, so in June, actually, the Norwegian fresh Atlantic salmon price, export price, they averaged their lowest level in 5 months. You can see that in the graph above. Okay, they reached Norwegian krone 98 per kilo. This represents an 11% month-over-month decline. That's a sharp monthly decline, and the lowest year-over-year growth rate in 2 years. Okay, they're still a little bit higher than 2022, but it was the lowest rate in 2 years. Okay, I'm talking about the monthly average in June. That's why you can see a little bit decline in weekly terms in week 25, but in the monthly average price, you can see prices are still above 2022 levels, but that gap has been declining sharply. Okay, and along with lower prices, the export volume has rebounded. Okay, so the export volume in Q2 2023 totaled 200,000 tons. This reflects a 5% year-over-year increase, and this was the first positive year-over-year growth pace in 6 quarters. Okay, there were 5 previous quarters with year-over-year declines. This was the first one in 6 quarters with an increase. Okay. So what can we see here? The demand as measured in Norwegian exports has been pretty sensitive to price movements. Okay, these multi-decade highs that prevailed for most of the year led to this downturn in demand. You can see that in lower Q1 exports compared to 2022's, but exports actually increased a bit in Q2 due to these lower prices. Okay. And wire prices, as I just mentioned, wire prices are now declining because this uncertainty regarding the salmon tax has dissipated. Production is also growing in Norway. It's expected to grow this year in Norway, despite there was these supply limitations in the first months of the year. And Chilean production is also growing, and exports are growing as well. So demand is pretty solid right now, and global production is actually increasing, which is making prices lower and creating a higher demand as well. Okay, let's move on to the next slide, please. So this short section, I'm going to talk about this outlook for meat and seafood, or for these products. We can see how global beef production is expected higher this 2023. Okay, for example, the USDA is expecting a 0.4% increase in total beef production in the world. The US will return its position as the largest producer, but let's remember that the US is actually declining its production. Okay, because of the what I just mentioned earlier, that they are facing lower cattle numbers. Okay, but Brazil, China, and Australia will manage to offset those declines in the US. Okay, and also in Europe. I haven't touched that much the case of Europe, but actually production will decline for the 5th consecutive year in Europe. Europe is facing tighter regulation, and that makes production to be less incentivized. Many producers are leaving that beef production. Demand is actually increasing in some countries. You hear a lot of stuff that demand in Europe is declining, but there's actually increasing demand in some countries, such as Spain, which highlights the need for more imports. Okay, so the countries with higher demand are going to face the need of more imports, but demand is actually falling in some countries, such as Germany, which is increasing its consumption of poultry, for example, and other stuff that they have a different cultural shifting in Germany than in Spain, for example. So they are declining their beef consumption. Brazilian production is projected to grow by 3%, as I just mentioned. Chinese production is also growing. It's expected to increase by 4.5% this year. Despite this growth in the domestic market, they are actually importing a lot as well. So Chinese demand is booming in this market. Argentina's and Mexico's production are also expected to grow, albeit at a slower pace, while Australia production is growing the fastest of these countries I just mentioned. It's going to grow by 10% because of this recovery in production after this cattle rebuilding process they had the previous years, because of the dry condition they experienced previous years. So now they're in a sharp recovery. And European production is going to decline, as I just mentioned, for the 5th consecutive year, and is going to reach its lowest level since at least 2019. Okay, now let's see the case of shrimp. This is very interesting because you have these two major exporters, which are India and Ecuador, competing for the first position. And last year, Ecuador surpassed India as the largest exporter, but India's exports have also been rising this year. So you can talk about this competition of these two countries in exports of shrimp. So what's happening between these two countries? They have significantly lower export prices. Okay, as you can see here in the graph, this is Japan's market in January, April, for example. We are comparing here the price versus the year-over-year volume gain in over the year. Okay, so these are exports in the first 4 months of the year for these countries compared to their prices, to their actual import prices from these origins. So as you can see, there's much more volume gain in those countries which have the lowest prices, which are India and Ecuador, and you can see the rest of the countries are trailing behind with higher prices, such as Thailand, Indonesia, Vietnam, and Argentina, and that's why India and Ecuador are gaining market share or practically all over the world. Okay, this is happening in the US too, for example. You can see how Vietnam, Argentina, Thailand are in negative numbers in volume gains, and they're actually experiencing volume losses in the Japanese market, while India and Ecuador are experiencing double-digit increases. Okay, so both Ecuador and India are taking measures to continue improving their cost competitiveness. But Ecuador actually is facing some challenges because there was this elimination on a fuel subsidy that could make production costs a little bit higher. A stronger dollar, for example, compared to the rupee, the dollar is not weak overall. It's weaker against the Mexican peso, for example, but it has been stronger against other currencies. So a stronger dollar, for example, in the case of India, this helps Indian exports because exporters receive more Indian money, assuming the price remains the same in dollars. Okay, so they have this advantage that they receive more. Exporters are more incentivized to sell abroad when the dollar is strong. However, Ecuador, which has a US dollar as its currency, doesn't possess that advantage. Okay. And finally, let's talk about salmon. Overall, we expect demand to continue increasing on this context of lower prices. Remember, we're now seeing lower prices. We expect demand to continue increasing because of this in this context. Okay. Overall, we're expecting Norwegian fresh Atlantic salmon exports to remain almost the same as last year's. Okay. It also seasonality wise, the bulk of Norwegian salmon exports typically occurs during the second half of the year. This suggests that further growth is ahead. Okay, but in overall, exports are expected to remain more or less the same as last year in the salmon markets. So this covers that presentation. Hopefully it was good, and let's pass on to the next section with the panelists. Oh, sorry, I forgot the key takeaways. Okay, this is good. Okay, let's summarize what's going on in these three markets. Okay, so beef. The main takeaway is beef supply and demand are expected to rise this 2023. Okay, Brazilian beef exports are continuing to breaking records, with China driving the demand. Okay, despite China is increasing its domestic production. US is exporting less on lower production. It's importing more. I didn't touch that point, but the US is importing more as well, or is expected to import a little bit more because so far they're more or less the same imports as in last year, but they're expected to import more. They're exporting less on lower production, but more to Mexico. Okay, because of this stronger peso. In the case of shrimp, world markets, especially the US and Japan, are subdued right now. They're not demanding that much, but China remains the bright spot. China is importing a lot of shrimp. Okay, Ecuador and India are vying for more market share because of their lower price. They're still in this strong competition to drive to increase their share in the global market. But the US is also showing signs of recovery. The import market in the US is showing, despite demand remains considerably below the previous last 2 years. The most recent numbers, which are May, are showing signs of recovery in the US. And in the case of salmon, Norwegian salmon exports are still below 2022 levels, but they have been recovering in recent months due to lower prices because of this dissipating uncertainty about the salmon tax and the global market. And this is going to reflect total volume to remain more or less the same this year as in last year. So those are the main takeaways from these three markets. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rene. I think, a lot of interesting influenced by inflation over the past few years, and people are changing their consumption habits. I think that's something we're going to discuss further as soon as we get the chance. But for now, let's move on to our panelists, to Guilherme and Jaison. So guys, I also want to remind you, if you have any questions for either of our speakers, just drop them in the chat. We'll try to answer these questions during the end of our webinar in the Q&A session. But for now, let's move on. I'm going to ask Jaison and Guilherme to just introduce themselves briefly. Let's start with you, Jaison. Can you just tell us who you are and tell us a little bit about what you do? Jaison, we can't hear you. You're not on mute. Jaison, sorry, can you just make sure your sound is working? I think I'm going to ask Guilherme to go ahead and introduce yourself while we sort out Jaison.
Yeah, can you hear me? Yeah. So, Hello everyone. My name is Guilherme. I'm seafood specialist, engagement manager at Tridge. I'm working mainly in Europe, especially in Portugal and Spain. I'm based in Portugal, and yeah, that's it. Jaison, are you there? No.
All right, let's see if we can. Here we go.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah. Now it's all good.
Yeah. Hi everyone. I'm seeing all the good morning, good evening messages, and so happy that everybody is present over here. I'm Jaison. I'm hailing from Kerala, down south part of India, and I hold a master's degree in agribusiness management with about 7 years experience over the same. And since about 2 years, I've been associated with Tridge, and we have been trying to develop the seafood fulfillment business in and across Tridge. I'm happy that to see all of you over there, and yeah, thanks, and over back to you, Theo.
All right, thanks, guys. I think let's jump straight into the first question. Guilherme, so you're in Portugal and also looking at the European markets. So specifically in these markets, can you tell us over the last few years, with everything that has happened, how has meat and seafood production, trade, and consumption changed?
Yeah, sure. So, as I mentioned before, I'm based in Portugal, and just to contextualize, because Portugal is a small European country, but we do eat a lot of seafood. In Portugal, every Portuguese consumes more than 150 grams of seafood per day, 2.5 times higher than the EU average. In 2020, this represented 59.9 kilograms per person per year. In the EU 27, so the EU countries, the upward trend verified since 2019 continues, with a 7% increase in 2020. The seafood imports in EU were in that year, in 2020, higher than $54.8 billion. Among the 27 countries in European Union, the consumption is very wide. So we have, for example, cases of Czech Republic where the average consumption per person is six kilograms. But then we have, in the other hand, Portugal with 59.9, almost 60 kilos per person. Actually, worldwide, Portugal is, I think it's number 3, if I'm not mistaken, in seafood consumption per capita after Japan and Iceland. In Portugal, we consume more than 600,000 metric tons of seafood each year. In terms of trade, Portugal and also EU trade mostly with other EU countries as main partner. Portugal has an equal trade balance, importing more than exporting. So we import 2 billion euros per year, and we export only 700 million euros per year. And Spain is our favorite partner for imports. We import 40% of our seafood imports are from Spain, and also the majority of our exports is to Spain. So regarding the seafood categories, just for you to know, only on canned seafood, Portugal has a positive trade balance where the exports are higher than imports. Regarding my region, but I will also speak about Spain. Portugal and Spain consumption trends are very, very conservative. The consumers prefer the whole fish or less processed seafood. In contrast, in the rest of the European Union, the consumption the trends are changing to a more processed seafood like breaded products, fillets without skin, prepared seafood meals like the pre-cooked nuggets or burgers or meatballs, whatever, creating an opportunity for better trading margins to some manufacturers. Recently, also it's not really seafood, but also another very important sector is the plant-based seafood. Is a new trend especially among the youngest ages. That's it. Yeah.
All right, thanks, Guilherme. I just want to ask a quick follow-up question on that. So Portugal's seafood consumption is already very high, and it's expected to continue increasing, and most of Europe also. So, is there like a substitution effect? Are people eating more seafood in place of something else, or why is this trend?
Yeah, I think as Rene mentioned on his presentation, it's not only the beef production in Europe that is decreasing. I think also the beef consumption is decreasing in Europe. Instead, people is replacing beef for more sustainable products like the seafood, for example.
Yeah. And Rene, also just a quick comment on that. If I'm not mistaken, I think you mentioned that also cheaper proteins, especially these days, are making more inroads in Europe, well, most across the world.
Yes, actually, in Germany, for example, meat consumption is declining. But you can see poultry is increasing, for example. So this is in part. Uh, it could be uh, people talk about health reasons, but price is also quite important. I mean, there's this difference between beef, but with beef, and in a context of inflation, of generalized inflation, they go for cheaper protein. This has been the case also in seafood, as I mentioned, that shrimp consumption declined because of these relatively higher prices. This is happening not only in the U.S. It's happening in Japan. In the case of beef, for example, in Brazil, which is a major beef exporter and consumer, beef consumption is also declining per capita, while poultry is increasing. You can see that because of well, there's other reasons, but one of the most important ones is the difference that beef has with other that the beef price has with other proteins such as poultry and pork, of course.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, guys. Jaison, let's go over to you. So, the situation in India, what is that like at the moment?
Yeah, I hope I'm audible. I hope you can hear me. Hello.
Yeah, we can hear you fine.
Yeah. So if you look at India, Rene has already given biggest insights on what is the production and what is the prices and all. But we have done a value of almost 8 billion in the last 20 to 23 years, which is on all-time high, and it accounted for almost 6% of the world production. So India, in terms of production, has done a decent job, and shrimps was a major, which almost 70% of the value came from shrimps, which is almost around 43,000 crores. And the demand for the Indian shrimps are majorly from US and China, even though they account for more than 60% of our value. China is proving a bit challenging in the coming years, because there is a lot of payment term challenges with respect to the China. And if I look ahead for the Indian the seafood industry, we believe that this industry is expected to grow at about 10% CAGR in the coming next 5 years. And we hope this is going to continue, provided that we had some issues in Ecuador, and because of that, India could actually pick up a good sales in the last year. And this year that we are also trying to improve on our genetic modified shrimps. So that is also expected to bring down the cost on the shrimps, and so that we'll be able to position our shrimp pricing at a better level in the global market. So consider all these factors, we believe that the Indian shrimp market is also going to achieve an all-time highs in the coming years. And with respect to this, we see that it is going to improve. And considering in terms of a consumption, the Indian shrimp consumption has also been growing in a very at steady rate of almost 8 to 9% per year. And that is also driven by the same fact that Rene mentioned, that the price of poultry, the price of meat has also been going up along with the inflation. And people are looking for cheaper sources of protein. And seafood is something that is easily available in almost all the major coastal areas of India, and in these are the regions that are driving the seafood consumption. Yes, I think I am able to answer all the questions over there.
Yeah, thanks. Also on that, Jaison. So, and maybe Rene, you can also give your opinion on this. So, we've seen Ecuador and India; they're very competitive price-wise in the shrimp market. And if they are competitive price-wise in the shrimp market, okay, now, and we're also talking about this, people are choosing kind of cheaper proteins, cheaper products. Is there a major difference in quality of shrimp from India and Ecuador? And if inflation kind of calms down and people have more disposable income, will they be going back to other markets like Argentina, Vietnam, and so on? So, Jaison, what do you think about that?
See, in terms of quality of the Indian shrimps, I don't think that there is not much of a change. But an Indian shrimp was always preferred more than that of Ecuador, even though the price of Ecuador was lower, is because of the taste aspect. So, I don't know how much of it is true, but the Indian shrimps is always considered better because of the taste benefit, and maybe because of our water quality, or maybe because of the growing conditions that we have in India. The Indian shrimps have always stand out for that specific point, and this is also one of the factors that is also leading to the increased consumption of Indian shrimps by the domestic people as well. There has been a good increase, but not as much as we see in other countries. But people are opting into shrimps, and we can find a lot of retail shrimps also on our retail shelves in the recent years, and that has also been increasing. And many of the companies have also come up with very good packaged and peeled and ready to eat shrimps that is easily available on the retail market as well. So yes, shrimps is always a cheaper option, but sometimes the farm shrimps are not cheaper than that of the sea caught shrimps or sea caught products which is easily available. But yes, yeah, and the US export. If you look at US as such, the Indian shrimp demand to US is expected to grow in the coming months. We had seen a decline in the recent time. It was majorly because the price is also not stable. The price is going up, price is going down. But now that the price is comparatively lower even than that of the previous years, we are expecting that the US demand is also expected to pick up, and I'm pretty sure that the Indian shrimps is going to position themselves as a good competitor for that of the Ecuadors.
Thanks, Jason. Rene, anything to add on that?
No, I think quality, of course, is important, but there's, yes, in this context of inflation, the price difference become actually important, as you mentioned. Perhaps we could see maybe a shift to other products. I don't think we're seeing shrimp as a commodity. I don't think they could be. We won't see if the price difference remains. I don't think we're going to see a shift to other countries, and maybe to other types of products or related products, but not. But the shrimp as a commodity, I don't think we're going to see this a difference just just for quality, because I think. The price difference is still going to make that difference. We can see that shift to other products as maybe if this
Right.
relative income or this disposable income actually grows from other countries.
Theo, like Rene said, this is actually a farm grown shrimp. So all the shrimps are farmed, and as it is farmed, I don't think, like Rene said, it is always the price that gives a better advantage over that of taste.
Yeah. All right, guys. Thanks for that. I think let's move on to the next question. So the next question is specifically about the risks and opportunities in your market and your specific region. I think let's start with you again, Guilherme, and then we'll move on. And if there's a discussion, we'll open that up. So Guilherme, can you go ahead?
Yeah, of course. So regarding major risks, I would point up like the environmental impact, especially the climate change, is a key risk for seafood production. We have the case in Iberia Peninsula. We are seeing extremely phenomena of climate change. Then we have regulatory challenge, like tighten compliance with fish regulations and aquaculture farming procedures. Failure on this area can lead to penalties, trade restrictions, and bad reputation. Then we have traceability and food safety. We had a webinar about this topic in the past. The consumer's preference. There is more awareness about traceability, sustainability, and ethical sourcing. And last, overfishing. Although this is not the main risk in the EU, overfishing is still a concern in some countries. Then, among the major opportunities, as I mentioned before, the growing seafood demand, especially in Portugal, but also in the rest of the EU, the upward trend is clear. Seafood is associated to a healthy diet, So there's a constant pursuit for that. Certification is also a major opportunity. Certified sustainable practices like MSC or ASC present themselves as an opportunity in the market. Innovation and technology, advanced fishing and farming techniques, more modern process plants, packing facilities, improve efficiency and quality. Just to give you a glimpse, for example, in Portugal, we only consume only 2% of our consumed fish is from domestic aquaculture. So we have a huge potential in Portugal for aquaculture. Then another major opportunity is circular economy, like using and minimizing waste, like the byproducts can create value-added opportunities. The international trade, EU is a major player in the international seafood trade with a lot of agreements established. And I think this is also important to tourism. This factory is easily observed in Portugal. We are a country with 10 million people, and we have around 27 million tourists per year. So promoting our gastronomy presents an opportunity for seafood-related companies.
I see. Thanks, Guilherme. I'm going to ask Jaison about the risks and opportunities in his region. So, Jaison, can you take it from here?
Yeah. So I personally believe that the biggest challenge India always faced is with the lack of trained, skilled fishermen. Even though okay, so with respect to shrimps, we are doing a very good export. In terms of shrimps, the biggest challenge is always in being a good hygienic production facilities and easy accessibility of the EIA centers where the checkings can be done. So we are in short of testing labs in India, and that could be done. If that could be increased, is one of the best things with respect to shrimps. But with respect to the seafood, it is always the lack of awareness among the fishermen. That is not, we don't have any. India doesn't do a lot of sea freezings, or almost all the materials that we are exporting are all sea caught and then land frozen. So if the government and the India could they could try to develop this sea caught and sea frozen materials, or if the farmers could be trained. I had even read reports of some of the farmers in Pondicherry who have just by creating an awareness among the farmers, they were able to get a very good revenue recognition of the sea caught material, or like the value of the material. They were able to sell at a premium cost because they were able to give a premium material. Now, if those are the major primary, risk that are the things that has to improve with respect to the Indian seafood is what I believe. And then the biggest risk of any of the Indian shrimp exporters is always with respect to the payment cost or the payment terms. See, for example, with respect to China, the payment terms are always very risky, and in case of any rejections, almost all the suppliers are currently depending on banks for the credit periods, and they're taking loans from the bank, and there is a lot of time that takes for all these payments to appear, and they end up losing a lot with respect to the time cost of money. And this is one of the biggest risks, and that could be improved if we could have a better bilateral relationship meetings, and we could have a better systems in place, and that could promote all these points with them. And like Ruva said, overfishing is also a major concern over here, and the sea region is also always changing. For example, if we are expecting tuna to be available in the southern part, sometimes in the next season we will not be getting the right number of catches from these regions. So I always believe that overfishing is something that needs to be addressed, and proper training has to be given to the farmers as well, the fishermen as well, and so that we will be able to control these and make sure that the marine ecosystem is also sustaining for a longer period.
Thanks, guys. Yeah, and connected to this, we had a question from our audience earlier that asked about the access for developing markets into this. So, especially, for example, Guilherme, if Europe is importing more fish, And India, obviously, let's say developing countries has some trouble. But how can let's say a new emerging developing country gain access to the European market? Guilherme, what do you think? What are the main hurdles to gaining access to the European market?
One good option is via Tridge. We can use Tridge to have access to these markets. So connecting suppliers and buyers it's our job, it's our role. So I think that's the main factor. We can advise on what any supplier can need or are the requirements for the European markets, but like certifications, like documents needed. Um, we can advise also about prices. So Tridge it's a good option to do it.
Yeah. And Jaison, you said like the shrimp market is pretty well developed. How can like the other markets follow suit and gain that access?
Uh, the biggest challenge is with the information, or that is where even trade is playing a vital role, and even the government of India is also doing along with MPEDA. They are promoting a lot of these products in many of these countries. Uh, but it is always about creating an awareness with all the suppliers on what needs to be done, how hygienic they need to create it. And if we are able to meet all, getting into EU market, or getting into the US markets shouldn't be a bigger challenge. At the moment I would still say that India is depending a lot on processors, to take a lot of materials. But if we are able to create some more better advanced, or taking the help of different opportunities available, if we are able to create a better system, then we'll be able to get a better prices for these products as well. It is not that our products are moving, it is only that we are not able to put and promote them in the right way.
Thanks. All right, guys, great. We're gonna move on to the last question. So, Jaison, while you're on a roll, let's continue with you. So, there are some new government regulations, environmental pressures. It makes it kind of difficult being a producer to have everything in place. So, how can the industry adapt to all these regulations and environmental pressures?
Yeah. So, talking about the government's role, this is somewhere that the government has to do a lot of job, or that is where they have to try to build. The first thing that majorly, like Guilherme said, is always about the overfishing. Creating that the ecosystem is not tampered too much, so that next year also we are getting a correct harvest of the seafood that is available. Another biggest challenge that we always face is that we overfish and we take in all the smaller size fishes as well, and that in turn is not going to give us a the next harvest season we are not going to get the right sizes of the sea cut materials. So this is somewhere that the environmental pressure is also there, that we need to somehow ensure and train farmers in order to do a sustainable farming practices. And that is something that which is also going to be, I believe, is also going to happen in the near future, and it is going to change. With terms of regulations, yes, this is something that is always the biggest question for all the shrimp exporters as well. uh, the policies have been changing frequently since the COVID pandemic had begun. The testings has been too much, or every 3 months there is something or the other change, or some other test is coming up, and then there's some other rejections happening. So this is something that if the government could do some negotiations and talks and could improve them, this is something that is going to smoothen out the industry's challenges and help the suppliers also to improve on their part as well. So we do believe that this is all going to happen, and in coming years that the revenue is also going to be achieved, and we are also going to improve on our shrimps export as well. With respect to meat, I would also say this point that the government has been able to support the Indian meat as well. The only challenge so far has been not India has always have this thoughts on on meat, and that is not promoted much. So this will also, I believe, with the global food is becoming common everywhere, and the trends are also changing. So I believe that is also going to be one of the major strong points of India in the coming years.
And Guilherme, how about in Europe?
So I think that it's very important to adapt to these governmental regulations and environmental pressures by staying informed about the laws, the regulations, the fishing quotas, best fishing practices, and farming practices. Also investing on research and innovation to help the industry to adapt to the climate changes. Adapt sustainable fishing and aquaculture farming practices. Also communication, education, and raising awareness, and try to differentiate in certain topic, like educate the consumers about the importance of responsible fishing practices, sustainability, and the commitment with the environment. Also, an active participation in policy discussion, helping to a better shaping of the seafood regulations. And last, the thirst for learning and continuous improvement. This means sharing knowledge and experience with the remaining players of the industry, what we call the collective improvement, and stay up to date with the latest scientific advances. That's right. Pretty good.
Thank you very much, Guilherme. Yeah, guys. So a lot of potential in the industry, but also some challenges. So I think that's all we're gonna have time for today. So thank you again to our speakers for all the valuable insights. I think we get a much better understanding of what's happening in the industry and the outlooks at the moment. So just before we wrap up, I would like to inform you about that these presentation slides are going to be available from our website within 2 working days. So just keep an eye out on our platform on tridge.com for the webinar recap analysis. You will find them there. And then also just to let you know about some of the other services that Tridge offers. So please just feel free to reach out to us. Like we said, like Tridge help connect buyers and sellers. And then also we have this opportunity to get your company and product noticed through our banner ad service. So this one, we've got more than 90,000 or close to 90,000 registered buyers. So if you'd like to promote your product, please also reach out to our sales team. Make use of this banner ad service. And then, yeah, thanks again, everybody, for joining us today. I think some excellent information from our speakers today. So once again, thank you very much to our speakers for your profound insights. And also on behalf of Tridge Intelligence and Solutions Division and all of us here, thank you for joining us today, and have a great rest of your day wherever you might be.